One of the biggest problems I see in nonprofit boards as their organizations start to grow isn't fundraising or even staffing. It's tension between the board and the staff. Sound familiar? And most of the time, the tension doesn't even stem from bad intentions. It comes from growing pains. It happens because the organization is changing, but people's expectations aren't changing at the same time. And the result is conflict. As someone who grew a nonprofit from startup to a larger, sustainable organization, I can tell you I've lived this myself. I've also seen it come up time and time again in the organizations that I advise, and even in many of your comments here on YouTube. So let's get to the bottom of it and how to solve it. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why this tension might be showing up in your organization, what a healthy board-staff relationship actually looks like as your organization grows, and what you can do right now to tackle the problem before it turns into real damage. I want to start us off by naming what's actually going on behind the scenes, why this conflict between the board and the staff can happen as organizations grow. So here's what's going on. Most new or growing nonprofits start with what's called a founding or working board of directors. That means board members aren't just governing, they're doing all the things. They're helping run the programs, write the grants, manage the volunteers, maybe even answer emails. And that's not a problem. In fact, it's often the only way a new organization can survive early on. But then something shifts when you start to bring on staff. Maybe the organization hires its first executive director or maybe a program coordinator. And then suddenly you have some board members doing some of the same things that staff is now responsible for, and people kind of start to step all over each other. I see it happen over and over again. Board members join when the organization is just starting up. They're eager, they're expecting to focus on hands-on work. Then staff were hired, expecting ownership over that very day-to-day work. And in the meantime, nobody clearly articulated that those roles were supposed to change throughout the process. According to BoardSource, this transition period from a working board to a governing board is one of the most fragile stages in a nonprofit's life cycle and one of the most common sources of internal conflict. Unclear roles and lack of boundaries at this stage can be really harmful. They can slow down decision-making, damage morale, and even drive staff or board members to quit out of frustration. Here's the thing. In the heat of conflict, it can feel tempting to blame one side or the other. But it's not actually really either side's fault. Most often, this is an issue with structure, not people. It just means that the organization is growing faster than its governance systems. So our job here is to catch up. Our first step is to know how to diagnose this problem in your own organization. Now, you might be listening to all this and thinking, that sounds uncomfortably familiar. But how can you know if this is what is really happening in your organization? Well, I'll tell you there are some clues that you can look for. Here are some of the signs that I see a lot, and let me know if you're experiencing any of these. The first is that board members start giving staff very specific instructions about how to do their jobs. And it doesn't feel like supportive or strategic guidance, but rather operational direction or sometimes micromanaging. Second, staff feel like their decisions are being second-guessed after the fact, or like they're being asked to run things, but not actually trusted to do so. Or third, maybe meetings are getting longer, but less productive. People are leaving confused about who owns what and who's doing what. So let's take this hypothetical scenario as an example. Imagine your board member used to manage your organization's volunteers personally, but now there's a staff person hired to do that. But the board member is still jumping in, reaching out to volunteers directly, changing schedules, making promises, etc. From their perspective, they might think that they're being helpful, but from your staff's perspective, it feels like micromanagement. And at the heart of all of this is that unresolved role transition. Who has decision-making authority? Who is accountable to whom? It's not clear to all involved, so friction is basically guaranteed. It's a messy problem, but it's not completely impossible to solve. So let's talk about that. What does a healthy division of roles actually look like in a growing organization? As nonprofits mature, boards are meant to shift from that working board status towards what's called a governing board. It means basically that they start to focus their efforts on higher level governance, not operations. That usually means the board focuses on financial oversight, hiring and evaluating the performance of the executive director, collaborating with staff on mission and long-term strategy, ensuring legal and ethical compliance, stuff like that. Whereas the executive director and staff, on the other hand, take responsibility for the day-to-day operations, program execution, hiring, firing, and managing staff under the executive director, managing volunteers and partners, co-designing strategy with the board, and then implementing the strategy once the board votes to approve it. This shift from the board handling day-to-day operations to the staff handling those operations matters greatly for a few reasons. First, it allows staff to actually do the jobs they were hired to do. Second, it protects board members from burnout and role confusion. And third, and this is very important, funders expect to see this separation as organizations grow. Research from the independent sector and other sources consistently show that funders associate clear governance structures with organizational sustainability and readiness to receive grants and other funding. So when boards are overly involved in operations at later stages, it can raise questions about capacity and clarity, making funders hesitate. So I'm going to share some practical steps you can take right now to address tension over the roles and responsibilities we've been talking about. But first, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this video, Click and Pledge. Click and Pledge makes it easy for new and growing nonprofits to start strong and scale with confidence. With Click and Pledge, you're going to get professional grade tools for super affordable startup level costs from day one. They've got customizable donation forms that you can plug right into your website to create the foundation of your online fundraising strategy. But Click and Pledge also has a number of other tools included in their affordable flat monthly costs. And you can use these as your nonprofit grows. Things like in-person and peer-to-peer fundraising features, video fundraising with embedded donation links, text-to-give tools, donor management and custom reports, Salesforce, and other integrations. And these are all included with no contracts or surprise add-on fees. Unlike some platforms that increase your fees as you grow, Click and Pledge pricing stays the same, whether you have 10 donors or 10,000. You can use the QR code and link in the description to check out Click and Pledge, book a demo, and get your first $25 monthly fee waived. So let's talk about what you can actually do right now to reduce this tension before it gets worse and risks causing real damage to your mission. First, name it. Name the transition out loud. You can literally say to your board and staff, our organization is growing, and that means roles need to evolve. When what's happening doesn't get called out definitively, people might not see it happening. They might assume that the old rules still apply. Second, revisit role documents together. And if you don't have written role documents, now is the time to create them. You need to create or update documents for the era that you're moving into, including job descriptions, board role descriptions, and recruiting language, any board committee charters that exist. The idea here is that by collaborating on updating these documents together with board and staff, you can create shared expectations. It's going to involve a thoughtful, open discussion, which brings us to our third step: agreeing on decision lanes. Who decides what, when, and how? Who advises whom? Who implements what? This clarity alone can remove an enormous amount of friction. But after discussing and getting some clarity, there's still a few more things we need to do. And the fourth is invest in board training and education. I see this often when I'm conducting board trainings for nonprofits. The truth is that many board members have never been taught what nonprofit governance actually looks like, let alone at different stages. Ongoing board training and development, not just at onboarding, is one of the strongest predictors of healthy board-staff relationships. And finally, make a plan to check in regularly with board and staff. You don't want to be reactive just when something goes wrong. You want to create a culture of open communication and mitigate problems before they begin. So during check-ins, ask, what feels unclear right now? Where are roles overlapping unintentionally? At the end of the day, this process isn't about flipping a switch and changing things over perfectly in one go. It's about these incremental adjustments that we can make and maintaining harmonious relationships. Ultimately, the success of a growing nonprofit is going to be determined by whether authority, responsibility, and trust are aligned as the organization evolves. And if you want to reflect with me a bit, I'm curious, which part of this feels the hardest for your organization right now? Where are you in this transition? If you take nothing else from this video, take this. Board and staff tension during growth is normal, but leaving roles undefined is optional. If you can try one thing this week, I hope it is that you schedule a single conversation, board and leadership together, focused just on role clarity, not strategy, not performance, just expectations around roles. And if you want additional guidance and support, I share weekly tips and resources in my free newsletter for nonprofit leaders and changemakers and on my website, changemakercafe.com. In the next video, I'll be breaking down how to create your nonprofit business plan this year, and you definitely want to subscribe so you don't miss that. I'm Amber Melanie Smith, and I'll see you next week. Bye.